X amount of staff, and that just gives your campaign or your work or project or wherever you're running just some focus really. The strategy is kind of all the basis behind the campaign. So we strategy, you look at like who your kind of audience is, you know, who are the kind of people that I want to engage with, you know. Then you've got your key messages. So kind of for each of those audiences that you're trying to engage with, you know, what do you want to be telling them? And how much influence do your audiences have? You know, how much work do you need to put into engage with those audiences? And the implementation is the doing stage. So that's where kind of like your social media channels come in, and lots of other channels which I'll talk about later on as well. What have you got access to kind of put your campaign or project in place? And also how are you going to tell your story? So kind of like which way are you going to go about telling your story as part of your campaign and getting people to do what you want them to do? And then evaluation stage, a lot of people when they run a campaign, that's something they sometimes forget about, but evaluation is really important, because if you run a project or a campaign, it is so important to kind of look back and see, you know, what worked, what didn't work, you know, what could you do differently in future if you run another campaign. So just quickly to put that into practice, just as a kind of live example, at CWV we've run a volunteering campaign since 2019. So we run it each year as a continuous campaign now, and basically the aim of that campaign is just to try and encourage more people across West Cheshire to take up volunteering. So just some of those elements I've just talked about in the last slide in terms of the campaign and how you can kind of run it based on a model. When we did our research, we found that only 27% of adults formally volunteered at least once a month, and that was according to a survey run by Community Life. NTVO's Time Well Spent report also highlighted that 55% of adults didn't volunteer because of their work commitments. Other reasons why people didn't volunteer included child or home commitments, people not being aware of volunteering opportunities in their area, and lots of more reasons. So just to show you as a live example, for this reason we set up our campaign around busting some of the myths about volunteering, highlighting that there's opportunities for everyone to fit in with other people's work and commitments. We also work with our members, so they're a range of charities, community groups, social enterprises, to try and make their opportunities as flexible as possible, so that, you know, when we are in our campaign and we're highlighting that there's opportunity for everybody and it's flexible, there's lots of chances to go out and help and make a difference. We work with our members to make sure that their opportunities were as flexible as possible. And then during the first year of our campaign, we allocated different themes to each month, so that helped us keep our campaign quite focused and kind of reinforce that point that there's a wide range of opportunities in lots of different areas. So for example, the themes we kind of focuses on were environment, younger volunteers, older volunteers, mental health, and lots of other themes throughout that year. And given the research we did and how we set our campaign, we kind of looked at some key audiences that we could try to target during our campaign. So we looked at kind of younger people looking to learn new skills and possibly lead into employment. So our key message is focusing on how volunteering could lead to employment, introduce people to new areas of work where they could find new skills and lots more. And we also targeted middle-aged adults who were currently in work, who at that point weren't really going out and volunteering much. So the key messages there were, you know, we were highlighting that volunteers really flexible, you can fit it around any home or work commitments that people might have. And then micro volunteering, you might have heard of, it's basically just giving up the amount of time that you can afford. So there's lots more micro volunteering opportunities now compared to what there were a few years ago. So I thought I'd just jump out the presentation for a couple of minutes, just if people want to have a quick chat, an informal chat. So before I go into the later parts of the presentation, maybe just start to have a think about, you know, any projects that you run in your organization, kind of what audiences do you need to engage with? So you can think about age ranges, lifestyles, locations, lots of other things like that. And also for those audiences, kind of like what key messages do you have for those audiences? So kind of what do you want to tell those audiences so they would ultimately do what you want them to do as part of your campaign or project or organisation. So I don't know whether you just want to spend a couple of minutes, just have an informal chat within the group, just to kind of see what projects people are currently running and what your audiences are and what kind of things you need to be saying to those audiences.
And again, it doesn't have to extend to tackling loneliness. If you're linked in with another project, because I know you all wear many hats, if there's anything else that you want to kind of add into the conversation, by all means do.
We're just got some other funding for a new sort of out and about scheme that we're going to be running, and it's our biggest issue is going to be getting out to the older generations who don't necessarily use social media. That for us is going to be a big issue, but it's also because I don't know if others have found, but CT websites aren't necessarily something that somebody's going to go and look at unless they particularly want our services. So although we've got Instagram, we've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, I don't think we're putting the right stuff on and targeting the right people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, on the next slide, I'm going to talk about different channels other than just social media, because like you said, you know, kind of the older generation aren't always on social media. So quite often, that's why I said at the start, in terms of like social media is great, but it doesn't work for everybody. So sometimes you do have to think about different audiences, how you engage with them, and I'll probably touch on it more later. But sometimes not using digital methods is more expensive. So for example, if you've got to physically print stuff out or put up boards and things like that, anything that's physical that you've got to produce, it always tends to be a bit more expensive, which is where that challenge is. But ultimately, if you're working with a certain client group, you have got to think about everything in terms of like, is what I'm doing the best way to engage with that audience? Because I think people automatically go down the route of just thinking that, you know, digital methods like social media and their website can solve all their issues or help them achieve what they want to do, but that always isn't the case. And unfortunately, especially I think in this sector, you know, those ways of engagement can be more difficult because, like I said, it does cost money. But hopefully some of the things I'll discuss later on in terms of different ways you could engage might work. Yeah. Don't know whether anybody else has got any comments or projects.
I was just going to add that I've actually just started thinking this week about things like the local council offices. They quite often have stalls so that you can advertise yourself.
Yeah.
Like the local carnival and things like that, just to get out there with the stall, basically saying, look, this is who we are, this is what we provide, these are the services that we do. You know, are you interested in anything? But trying to draw people in is the hardest part.
Yeah, I think, you know, any events like that are run like by the local council and so on, you'd hope that they'd be doing a lot of things to kind of market those. So hopefully, you know, if you can engage in things like that, that can really help, because it takes the pressure off you as much in terms of it isn't your standalone event, so it's not just you publicising it and trying to get people there. But yeah, I think things like that are always really handy to get involved with. It's just trying to get people there, isn't it? That is a challenge as well. But like I said, if you engage with events that are being accessed or run by different organisations as well, that can really help, because you can just kind of use that to your advantage and kind of piggyback on that. Don't know whether anybody else has got any projects. Oh, sorry, I think Jane.
Hi, yeah, we run community transport in Bassetlaw, and we have volunteer befrienders, etc. So several volunteering opportunities. I just wanted to say that we've just had, we've been fortunate this year to have funding for volunteer recruiters. So we've had 2 for a 1-year fund, which is very unusual for us. But they have just attended all of the flu fairs. We managed to get so that they would let us attend all the flu fairs within the PCNs, and that's been really successful. They've had lots of interest because it's been like a targeted audience, if you like. there. So I don't know if other people can do that. I know they've probably finished for this year, but for next year, it's something to think about because it was really good.
Oh, that sounds great. Don't know if there's anybody else want to share. If not, I'll move on to the rest of the presentation.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Sorry, it's Mandy. I just wanted to ask the previous lady, because I've tried that in the past with flu clinics and been really unsuccessful. Were you recruiting volunteers there? Sorry, you were recruiting volunteers at flu clinics?
Yeah. What they were doing was they were telling them about our volunteer opportunities and just giving out expression of interest forms and getting them to complete them. And then the coordinator for each of those projects would get back in touch. Now, we got around and about in the last few months, not all from flu fairs, but out of 44 expression of interest forms, we've recruited 10, which for me is really good.
That's very good, yeah.
Yeah, because you're always going to get those that in the end don't want to do it, but that was really successful.
Right. That's really interesting, because I thought flu clinics would be an ideal opportunity to meet older people with their own transport, which is our target market really, but not, but still driving and everything. And we've got 0, so I don't know what we're doing wrong. Perhaps I just need to try it again and be a bit more focused about. I don't know. It sounds like you just did exactly what we did, though, to be honest.
Yeah, probably. I mean, they weren't all drivers. I think there was six drivers and about 4 befrienders came out of it. But yeah, it was really good.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. That's a really good conversion rate. It's 25%. Excellent. Well, I shall bear in mind your sterling example.
Okay. Right, I'll just move on to the rest of the presentation. Hopefully that's showing again now and you can see that. So yeah, before I go on to social media in a bit more detail, it's just worth thinking about the different channels that you can use, because I think, like we've just had a chat about then, social media and other similar platforms don't always work depending on who your audience are. So you've got your website. So there's so much information that obviously you can store on a website about your organization and what you do. And this is always a great place to kind of move people from social media to. So when you've got somebody on your social media channels, it's always really useful if you can to kind of drive that traffic around your different platforms. So your website's a great place to link to from social media or e-newsletters or other channels. And then it's quite funny because probably about 5-10 years ago, everybody wanted a flyer and thought that a flyer would solve all your issues, when it really doesn't from a kind of comms point of view. It works in some cases, but flyers don't always solve all your issues. And I think in the last few years, I think people are seeing e-newsletters as exactly the same. So while I think everybody now, e-newsletters have kind of boomed in the last few years, people now think that solves all your problems. It doesn't always, but they are really handy. Obviously you can set up an audience and try and increase that audience over time and engage with people by email really easily. Again, you can link to websites and other places to kind of push people around your different channels, and you can get all kind of data from e-newsletters as well, which is really useful in terms of kind of like open rates, click rates, so you can see kind of who's engaging with your content, how successful it's being, what type of content's working, what kind of and what type of content's not. Another channel, word of mouth. If your organization builds up a strong reputation, people will start talking about you, they'll know what you do, and then they'll start talking to you about your organization to other people as well, and then naturally they'll start looking up your website, social media channels and so on to see what you're doing. Physical and digital signs are another way you can kind of engage with people as part of a campaign or project you're running. As we just talked about just now, again, it is typically a bit more expensive, so that's a challenge. Digital screens are kind of probably a lot more popular these days than physical, because obviously you can change the artwork easily. Obviously anything that's physically printed, if it becomes out of date, you've got to replace it, so there's that cost element there. And then local media, it's really important that you know, try and engage with local media, whether that be newspapers, TV, radio. Generally, resources in local media are quite stretched now, especially newspapers. So I think the easier you can make it for them, and the more content you can provide for them, the better, because they're quite, you know, happily just going to lift and shift it into their newspapers and so on. And also, you know, think about any stories as part of your campaign or your organisation or project that you're running. You know, have you got a real story that you can pitch to TV and radio that might be interested in doing an interview to kind of publicise what you're doing? And then think about kind of like meetings as well. You know, if you've got a campaign or project running, if you're at meetings like this, or you go to any boards or meetings with other sectors, you know, could you be telling people what you're doing to try and push out your messages as part of your campaign? And I kind of joked about flyers earlier, but, you know, printed resources, you know, they are still important for some audiences. And, you know, that's something you can look at as part of your campaign or project, you know, to try and get the word out a bit further. So obviously we talked about, you know, audiences, key messages, channels. So this is just something I put together as a really short example really quickly. So looking at transport, for example, you know, if you had an audience, you know, people aged 70 and above without access to any technology, you know, what could your key messages be for them? You know, it could be that they could access free transport near them. They can get out and about in the community to improve their health and well-being. They could find support and services, you know, near to them that they might be able to use and benefit from. When you've got different audiences and key messages, I would never include too many. So I think if you have a look at your audience, you know, who I'm hoping to engage with, just 2 or 3 key messages that you want to get across to them in anything you put out there, whether it's social media, your website, flyers, so on. Just 2 or 3 key messages are really key, and just make sure you're repeating them over and over again in all you do. And then, for example, just on this, you know, some channels you could use to engage with that audience because they haven't got access to any technology. It could be digital and physical signs, like we just said, you know, to put up in local community centres or bus stops, advertisement in printed brochures and publications, as well as TV and radio, or you could do leaflet drops at local community centres and similar. So I just thought, again, just take a couple of minutes, just have a chat in the group. You know, what channels do you currently have and use, and kind of have you had much impact using them as part of your campaigns or projects? Are there any that, you know, I've talked about today potentially that you think might work for your audience and you can use moving forward? Just thought I'd open it up. Anybody got any ideas, comments?
I worked with Macmillan a few years ago, Ryan, and we used local parishes, parish meetings, church meetings. They were really useful, and I'm quite open to any possible suggestions. So I don't know whether anyone else has tried that.
Absolutely.
I think
I've used previously.
Sean.
I've used kind of going into cafes where they have small craft groups and things like that.
Yeah.
It's always a useful thing. You can get in, have a chat, cup of tea, bit of cake, and kind of start to having chat to people if they're doing those kind of activities as well, while they're knitting or doing the other crafts that they're doing.
Yeah, like in libraries as well.
Yeah.
That's it. I think, you know, quite often, as good as kind of websites, social media, any channels that are as good as they are free as well. Like I'll kind of talk about later on. Sometimes, you know, word of mouth and just face-to-face meetings, just talking to people, that sometimes can be the most powerful way, especially with certain audience like we talked about who have got no access to technology or anything like that. The older generation, you know, it sometimes they're the most powerful ways. And actually, when you talk in person with somebody, they can always reinforce the point of, you know, how successful your project is or how good your organization is. So, you know, that is always really powerful. Don't know whether anybody else has got any examples of, you know, any projects or campaigns you've run and the way you try to engage with people. What's worked, hasn't worked? Any comments? If not, I can just move on.
Just before we do, there was a question from, I think it was Natasha in the chat.
Oh, sorry, Sean.
I think potentially
Yeah.
to John, actually, your colleague there. John, we mentioned a platform that we use to kind of look for volunteers. Would that be something like the kind of
Team Kinetic?
Team Connect? Absolutely. I was struggling for the name there, and I thought with having an expert on the call.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about the expert bit, but yeah, Team Kinetic is the platform we actually use at the moment. I think your local voluntary action services will actually have their own platforms. Team Kinetic is UK based. I can send you the link.
That'd be
if
brilliant.
you'd like.
Fantastic.
That'd be useful.
All right, I'll shut up now.
Yeah.
And hand it back to everybody.
Yeah, no, I think lots of CVSs across the country use them. Like with our campaign that I mentioned earlier on, kind of with that campaign, that's where we push people to all the time. So any case studies you've got around volunteers, anything we run as part of the campaign, we're always pushing people to that platform to see all the opportunities out there. I know on our platform, I think we've got around about 100 volunteering opportunities at the minute and about around 700 active volunteers. So if you are running a campaign, and I'll talk about kind of linking through to websites and stuff later on in a bit more detail, but if you have got a platform like that, that's ideal as part of your campaign to keep on kind of sending people over to. Right, I'll just go back to the presentation. So yeah, just looking at social media channels in a bit more detail. There's obviously a wide range of channels you can use. These aren't just those that you could use, but these are just some of the most popular ones that you'll probably see out there. So you've got Facebook. So obviously, I'm sure most of you will have heard of Facebook. It's been around for quite a long time now. I think Facebook, typically there's a slightly older audience on that platform. So like you and I will have personal accounts, but most organizations will have pages. And the great thing about pages is obviously you can get a lot of that data in terms of kind of who's engaging with your content, what times of the day people are engaging most, so you can use that kind of data to see what's working and what isn't working. Facebook can be quite video led, so a lot of people use videos on Facebook and they work really well. And you'll also see that there's a lot of kind of community groups and forums on Facebook. So I think for our sector, Facebook does tend to work quite well because it's got more of a kind of local community feel than other platforms. For example, Twitter has. Twitter again does have a bit of an older kind of audience compared to some of the other platforms that are listed on there, and it's a lot more business like. So for kind of campaigns and projects I've run in the past, kind of what's worked on Facebook hasn't always worked on Twitter, and the type of people engaged on those two different platforms are quite different. So for example, I've kind of supported adult social care campaigns in the past. Content's generally worked a lot better on Facebook because that's where that audience tends to be a lot more, rather than Twitter. You know, any kind of like partnership work or more kind of business type content always tends to work a lot better on Twitter when it comes to adult social care. You've then got Instagram. So Instagram's got a far younger kind of audience compared to Twitter and Facebook. It's very kind of image and video led compared to some of the other platforms. So I think kind of like text takes more of a backseat on Instagram compared to those other platforms because, like I say, very much led on images compared to Twitter and Facebook. And then you've got kind of TikTok, which is kind of a younger audience again. In the last few years, that's kind of boomed. I must admit, I've not used TikTok an awful lot because for the campaigns that I've run and the audiences I try and engage with, it doesn't tend to work as well as some of the other platforms do. And then you've got kind of LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's obviously a lot more to do with businesses. There's a lot of kind of business people on that platform. What that tends to be really good with is kind of linking in with other organizations, other kind of business people. A lot of business people tend to find a lot more work through that platform just with engaging with with different people on there. And then you got Snapchat, so that's been around for quite a while too, and that's all kind of based on like really short content because you can only see it for a certain amount of time. And that doesn't tend to be used by organisations as much as it might have been a few years ago. But yeah, there's lots of different channels that you can use and access as part of your campaigns. So just why use social media as part of your campaigns and work? I mean, that's a very broad question, and you could probably spend a long time on that. Probably the first thing is it's free. So whether it's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, they're all kind of free to use. So why wouldn't you want to use these platforms to try and engage your audience, or expand your business, or just let people know the great work you're doing in your organization? Also, these are very easy to set up, so most of these channels, they shouldn't really take you long to set up at all. Once you put in your details about your organization, what you do, where you're based, the kind of times you operate and so on, once you've got that kind of initial information set up, it really shouldn't take you too long to kind of get started up and running and start to kind of grow your audience on that platform. I think the great thing about social media is you can get to know your audience is a lot better as well. So I think, you know, I mentioned in a previous slide about how you can get a lot of data from these different social media platforms, so you can kind of find out what content's working for these different audiences, maybe kind of what times of the day they're engaging more with your content. So it does really help you get to know those audiences better. And in terms of kind of that data and analytics, while it's really useful, also people can get drawn into a trap of kind of reading too much into it and actually you know, reading the data wrong, so to speak. So for example, on Twitter you might see that you've got 10,000 impressions on a tweet. That means it might have reached 10,000 people, but the bottom line is 10,000 people wouldn't have actually engaged with that content. So kind of, while it is great all the data you can get, you also need to be careful, you know, how you use that, interpret it, and kind of use it moving forward. I think social media that I find is, no matter whether you're a social media professional or whether you're just starting out, is you can trial new things. So, you know, if there's like different type of content you want to use, you can trial it. If it works, it works, that's great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And like I said, you've often got that data, those analytics to kind of see perhaps why it didn't work, so you can learn and kind of make changes in the future moving forward. When you're using social media and any other channels to that matter, so, you know, social media channels, your websites, anything physical you get printed out, like flyers, digital boards, so on, having a house style is really important. Whenever you're running a campaign or project, I think having everything that you use as part of that project looking similar is really important, because at the end of the day, brand is really key. And whenever people look at your content, you want them to try and link it back to a campaign. So if they see your social media graphics or your flyer or your boards, they'll link it back to that campaign and think, you know, they're talking about the volunteering campaign or whatever project you're running. So I've just included an example on this slide now. So that's a social media graphic that we had made as part of our volunteering campaign. So all of our different resources that we make look the same as that. So it's all consistent. People link it back to that campaign. I think, along with any kind of design concepts, it's really important that you have a house style for your kind of written text as well. So any text that you have on your website or social media channels, it's really important that that's all the same, following a style. So you know, in terms of it, if you've got more than one person who's managing your social media accounts, you don't want people to think that, oh, Joe Blogs is posting this day or somebody else is posting the other day. They should just look at it and thinking that organization's posting. I think it's really important to have that house style and make sure that anything you post is the same, so people can't tell the difference between one person posting from one day to the next. Also kind of think about links, you know, how you use links and things like that. So you might want to use kind of the long URL that you just get from your website. There's a lot of URL shorteners as well, so you might have heard of things like Bitly or Oli. So they basically short the URL, so it's not as long when you're posting on social media, and it just looks a little bit cleaner sometimes. Then also think about, you know, using things like emojis. A lot of kind of organizations will use emojis just so that their kind of content on social media looks a bit lighter. You need to think about your organization. Are you a kind of fun organization? Do you want your content to look a bit lighter, not as kind of formal, but also you don't want to kind of overuse emojis because you don't want it to look kind of unprofessional in what you're doing as well. And then choosing the right content. So this is really important as well. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, there's different types of audiences on different social media platforms. So kind of what kind of works for one platform might not necessarily work for the other, and it's really key that you use that data that I talked about that you can get from social media platforms to see what's working for you on those kind of numerous social media platforms that you're using. So for example, if you're looking at using imagery or social media graphics, for different platforms, different sizes work. So on Instagram, for example, square images tend to kind of work a lot better. On Facebook and Twitter, it's typically more rectangular shaped images work better. Some of the platforms, not as many as they used to, but some of the platforms do tend to kind of crop off some of the images if they don't fit the right size for those different platforms. So it's kind of really important that you have the right size imageries for those platforms. You know, on, for example, Instagram and Facebook, you have the kind of stories. So kind of they ideally want to fit the size of your phone screen. So it's just really important that you have the right size images for the right platform. And then just think about kind of video content. So, you know, will video content work? Like I said, Facebook tends to work really well on that. Instagram a lot more so now, and video didn't used to be used on Twitter as kind of much as it did now. But yeah, think about video content. Can you use that? Like I said, video content, reels are very popular on Instagram as well. And really in terms of like content and what's right for each channel, I think with your audience, you always want to try and make it as easy as possible to engage with content. The easier your content is for people to digest, the more likely people are to engage with it. So just talking about graphics and videos, with graphics, there's plenty of software available out there for you to kind of make your own as part of your campaign. Some people will go to agencies or people outside their organization for support around graphics, but it's really easy to do it yourself. For example, I've always used Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, which are all Adobe software, but there's lots of free software out there. For example, Canva that you can use. So John, who works with me, he's on the call. John knows everything about Canva that you could possibly wish to know. John uses it all the time. It's a free software, and there's lots of different templates that you can use on there to kind of design, whether it's a presentation, a business card, a flyer, social media graphics, and so on. And those templates are really, really useful. What I would say, as I kind of mentioned earlier, that kind of house style and trying to keep a consistent look and feels really important. So if you do find a template that you like on Canva, for example, make sure you stick to that template so that everything you're kind of doing looks similar. It's got the same look and feel as part of your campaign. Canva as well. A lot of not-for-profit organisations can access a kind of pay version for free. So it's always worth looking out for that on Canva, because with that you'll be able to access a wider range of templates as well to use. And with video content, it's like never been easier to film your own videos. I think the day where you had to carry around a camera with a tripod has kind of passed, unless you're creating a video professionally to go on a TV advert or something like that. You don't really need to. It's so easy these days to just film on your mobile phone. You can even get a tripod for your phone, and videos are kind of a great way to kind of tell a story. So if you have got a campaign, you know, case studies and videos of real people talking about whether it's volunteering or working in social care and so on, those real videos are kind of really important and can really help persuade the person do what you ultimately want them to do as part of your campaign. And videos, you know, for social media, 30 seconds to a minute maximum, they're ideal. Just really short and sweet snippets videos are kind of perfect for social media. And in terms of kind of like editing videos as well, most mobile phones now, you can actually edit videos yourself on your phone without needing to do it kind of on a laptop. So yeah, videos, social media graphics, so on. It's kind of never been easier to kind of do that yourself now. And yeah, so use social media for storytelling. Like I said, case studies, you know, painting a picture of your campaign through real stories and real people is ideal for kind of social media. It's kind of such a powerful way of kind of telling that story is part of your campaign, and I think people are automatically interested in people. So, you know, like I said, those real stories really do help. The battle often with kind of case studies and video content is actually getting volunteers and people happy to do it. It's quite often a challenge I have with kind of any campaigns I run, but kind of once you've got that relationship with people and you've got people happy to support your campaign and get involved with that kind of stuff, it's a really good way, like I say, of telling that story. And then call to action. So this might sound a bit like jargon, but call to action means basically what are you telling people you want them to do. So I think any comms you send out, whether it's on social media, e-newsletter, on a flyer, any methods that you're trying to engage with people on, a call to action is really, really important. You know, it's pointless creating content if you haven't got that call to action in place, and asking people to do what you ultimately want them to do. And so that might be applying to volunteer, that might be applying for a paid job role at your organisation. Having that call to action in place where you're sending people to is really important. So, you know, if you post it on social media, that might be a link to your website where they would apply. It might be an email address that they could email for more information. It might be a phone number where they can get support. But having that clear call to action in place across your channels, no matter what you do, is really important. So just with what we've kind of like spoken about so far in the session, I just wanted to have a quick chat to say, is there anything that you've seen? It doesn't have to be kind of as part of your organisation or part of your work, but is there anything that you've seen on social media or on TV, it might be at home, outside of work, that you think has kind of stood out or has kind of really engaged you? And it's worth just thinking about kind of like, why has that kind of stood out for you? Why is that really engaged you, that type of content? And then, you know, are you part of their audience that they're trying to target? What were the key messages that they were telling you that engaged you and made you kind of sit up and listen? So I just thought I'd have a quick chat if anybody's got anything they wanted to add about, you know, anything that's stood out for them recently that you think that's a really good piece of content that's really engaged you.
Hi, so I'm recruiting younger volunteers. That's my sort of role in this, and it's been an interesting sort of time because I think what we've sort of come to learn is that, and I think this is probably true of our older volunteers as well, I think there's something around people engaging with what it actually feels like to experience being a volunteer. And we had a meeting about this last week as a team, and it's around I think it's around those people taking the steps to then say, yeah, I want to be a volunteer. And I think it's you know, just having a sort of very two-dimensional bit of paper in front of them or something like that. But I think we're going to start to use videos more, because I think that, you know, we did some filming of one of our drivers, and it was just, you know, he was just saying how much he got from being a driver and you know, what it looked like. And I think with the younger people as well, I think you have to be I think you've got to be pretty quick. I don't think people necessarily commit to sitting and watching something that's really lengthy. You know, it's got to be so it's just that the challenge is just to get the right amount of information in a short space of time.
That's it. And like I said, for like social media, if you're thinking about video content, 30 seconds to 1 minute maximum is ideal. I mean, you should ideally be able to get all the key things you want to be telling people across in that length of time. And like you say, I think anything longer than that, people just don't engage with it. They switch off. And like, for example, on Facebook, if you posted a video on Facebook, what I was saying about the analytics and the data, it will tell you kind of what the average length that people are watching. And you will find on Facebook that probably people will watch for 4 or 5 seconds. So really, you want to be really drawing people in to any content, video especially. You want to be drawing people in really early and try and get them on board with what you're trying to tell them really early, because people just don't engage. For example, with video content, which I don't think I mentioned it, but subtitling is really important, because how many times can you think when you've been on Facebook and you've been scrolling down, you've got a subtitle video, you haven't turned the sound on? I do it all the time. And you're just reading the subtitles, because people are just scrolling down their timeline and they just read the subtitles without needing the volume, but you're still engaging people. People still know what the video's about because the subtitles are there. So I think it's really important to think about things like that. And there's lots of free software for subtitling as well. It can sometimes take a bit of time, and it's because you need to check that the subtitles are correct when it auto generates and stuff. So it does take a bit more time, but it's definitely worth it. And also it depends on your audience as well, because, you know, lots of people, you know, if people are kind of deaf, you know, if it hasn't got subtitles, they won't be able to know what's going on in the video. So I think trying to make your content as accessible as possible is really key. But yeah, I think video content's a really great way, because like I said, those real stories are sometimes what kind of drives people on to actually do something, because it's all well and good saying, well, we got volunteering opportunities, come and volunteer with us, but to a lot of people that doesn't mean anything. Whereas if you got somebody on a video talking about volunteering, it could be that, you know, they've retired and just wanted to give back something to people, or it could be that they're younger and they want employment opportunities to learn new skills. So depending on who your audience is, somebody talking on camera, a real person talking about their experience, it is really powerful. I think with the campaigns that I've run, I've just tried to get as much of that content together as possible, because it does work. It does work. Somebody's got their hand up.
Hello,
Helen,
it's me.
Sorry. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Helen. I'm from the Beacon Centre. I just wanted to follow up actually on what you just touched on briefly there about accessibility, because we're a sight loss charity. So just in terms of accessibility and making social media posts accessible for people with sight loss, 2 very easy ways to do it are add an alt text, which is an image description, and also an image description on your post. It really doesn't take long, and it really does make an awful lot of difference for people who have sight loss.
Definitely. Yeah, that's something I would definitely advise anybody to do. I think Facebook and Twitter you can. I don't think LinkedIn you can actually, which is poor. But
Yeah, no, you can. There's alt text on LinkedIn.
Oh, is it? Okay, sorry. And also in terms of on accessibility, in terms of your websites and things like that, always try and avoid PDFs. Because if you've got a PDF on your website which is 20 pages long, especially if it's designed and just isn't plain text, anybody with a screen reader won't be able to access that information. So if you're ever uploading any documents to your website, just be careful. And if you have got a PDF that's got loads of information, it's probably better just to have it on your web page rather than as a document uploaded. So I think websites and things like that, it is really important to think about that to make sure it's accessible as possible to everybody.
In terms of content that I think is most effective, because just this Christmas just gone, we ran a campaign to raise money for our accessible transport, just to make it more available to like older people who, especially because this winter was so harsh. So we were like trying to gain support so we could provide more assistive buses that could go out to older people or disabled people who can't go out by themselves. And one thing we did that was really effective was not only using pictures of some of our passengers who have used our transport, but also including a quote from them about how our transport has helped them specifically. And because rather than us just saying, this is what we do in the community, it was someone actually saying, this is how this organization has helped me and made my life better. I think that really spoke to like the empathy of whoever was reading it, and it encouraged them to support more. And we managed to raise quite a lot of money then clearly towards our transport because of that. So I think as much as possible, using the words of the people who are using your services is very, very important.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, it's just that real content, isn't it? With kind of real people, it does make such a difference. And you can always look at because sometimes getting like real photos and things like that is a challenge, but you can also look at if you've got a campaign, like I said, generating social media graphics, that follows the same style and use quotes as part of that as well. You can do case studies on your website that you can link through to as well using quotes. So yeah, there's loads of different ways, lots of different type of content that you can try and use. But I think if you just said then again, using real people, real quotes, to just show the impact it's had, whether it be on the volunteer or the person they're helping, is really useful. So I'll just go back to the presentation if nobody else has got any other thoughts. So yeah, just a kind of quick recap really on a lot of the things we discussed. Firstly, strategy. I know it's a word that puts a lot of people off, but it is quite important to think about that strategy, to kind of think about how you're going to set out your campaign and project that you'll be running. Within that, think about your audiences. Who are your key audiences? Who are the type of people you're hoping to engage with as part of your campaign or project? And then, for each of those audience, what are the key messages, the key things you want to be saying to them to kind of ultimately for them to do what you want them to do. And then again, look at your channels. So once you've got your audiences, your key messages, think about your different channels, all those different things. I've mentioned earlier, what channels are going to kind of work the best to engage with those audiences, and then within those channels, what content can you come up with to kind of use as part of your campaign that will work on those different channels. And like I mentioned earlier, always make sure there's a call to action with your content, so somewhere to kind of direct people to afterwards, whether it be a website for more information or to apply for a volunteering opportunity, or a phone number for somebody to call, or an email address for somebody to email. So always having that call to action at the end of any content is really, really important.